Good morning. I've been told to start this. I know we had some delays in the previous session, but thank you for joining us today and for being with us. My name is Susan Bristol. I'm the Municipal Policy Specialist at the Watershed Institute, and I'm happy to present this panel, the three R's, which for us means redevelopment, restoration, and resiliency. And I'm happy to join these good folks to share this with you. A little bit of housekeeping. We would like to first thank all of our sponsors. I'm sure you recognize most of them. We are very appreciative of their support. If you're a virtual attendee, we're starting the session now, and make sure that your stream is enabled in Zoom. Housekeeping, please silence your devices. During the Q&A, we'll be circulating a microphone and we will be entertaining questions from the virtual attendees as well as folks in the room. So raise your hand at that point if you want to be included. And if anybody online has technical problems, you see there's an email address for support. Today, this session offers APA Planner Continuing Maintenance credits for AICP status. It's 1.25 credits. Please sign the sheet in the back of the room, and then you can claim those credits on your professional website. So, hold on one second. I want to introduce this panel and our panelists in a slightly abbreviated way. Again, this is a panel that has brought together several of the professions that are taught in New Jersey universities and that are relevant in our watershed work together to share some of their academic watershed work specific to redevelopment, restoration, and resiliency. Some of the work we present has been going on for certainly more than a decade. And we're happy to include not only two practitioners who are currently in watershed organizations, which is Tom DeLessio and myself, but two students, recent student and current student from the disciplines of architecture and landscape architecture. So planning and design professionals are a critical part of the interdisciplinary work required to improve resilience in New Jersey communities. Our universities and our professional programs are not, unfortunately, not under one roof or on one campus even. But the work we do complements each other's approaches, and we often overlap in our pedagogical practices. So we believe that the education of tomorrow's architects, landscape architects, and planners is especially important to watershed work. And the projects that emphasize the improvement of watersheds include redevelopment opportunities that practice unbuilding past development, the restoration of natural systems, and resiliency by design. So our first speaker will be Tom DeLessio, currently Executive Director of the Musconetcong Watershed Association. He is a planner by trade and an adjunct professor at the Blaustein School. Our next speaker will be Manushi Patel, a recent 2023 NJIT graduate. She's an aspiring architect and designer currently at STV. She'll be presenting work that was co-created with one of my former colleagues, Georgine Theodore, who is in charge of the urban design program at NJIT School of Architecture. Our next speaker is Laurie Ferreras. She anticipates graduating in 2025. She's currently at the Rutgers University in the Master of Landscape Architecture, and she is sharing some emerging work with us, which is based on her thesis. So I think I hope you enjoy the range of generations and disciplines that come together for this panel. So I'd like to invite Tom DeLessio up to the podium, and he will present his work. And we really appreciate, keep your eyes open because we're going to fly through a lot of slides and give you a lot of visuals, and we hope you enjoy them. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. And thank you, the Watershed Institute, for a wonderful conference. Yesterday's virtual session was utterly amazing, and the plenary this morning was a great way to kick off. So I am Tom DeLessio. I wear a number of hats. I am the executive director of the Musconetcong Watershed Association. I'm also a lecturer at the Blaustein School of Planning and Public Policy, and a former director of the New Jersey Institute of Technology's Center for Resilient Design. And I'll talk about all of those. I'm also the vice president of policy for the American Planning Association New Jersey chapter, and we're thrilled that APA is also activity of this. I need to be careful because a couple of my students are in the former students are in the audience, and I appreciate all the alumni of NJIT, Rutgers, and APA that are involved. So we'll talk a bit about some lessons from Sandy and beyond, restoration, redevelopment, and resilient design. So think about where you were 148 months ago, right? Jersey Shore was a TV show. That's what most people in the world knew about the Jersey Shore. When they thought about Sandy, they thought about Grease, the movie. And resilient design, not really on anyone's radar, but this happened. And any of you that were here during Sandy and after Sandy understand the profound impact it has played here in New Jersey, where homes, businesses, infrastructure, and personal possessions were all devastated. In Hoboken, it took days to actually recover because of the flooding that was happening. But we've seen this story before. In 2011, Patterson was flooded, and we've seen it since. Whole communities have been devastated. Beaches have been closed. The costs have been amazing and utterly unfathomable. 113 towns were impacted alone by Sandy. Over $380 million of commercial property loss, $64 million in interruption losses. It was the third most costly US hurricane. So what do we do about that? Just after Sandy, I was actually teaching at NJIT, and the dean of the College of Architecture asked me to found a center for resilient design. And we asked a couple of questions: to build or not to build? And if you build, how do you go about doing that? Our center was focused on three pillars of research, testing, and outreach. And I will share with you some of the work that we did during that period. We asked a couple of key questions. What are we protecting? People? Property? We need to think about these. What risks are we willing to accept? And are we prepared for the 100-year, 200-year, 500-year events that are happening more and more frequently? And for what? Immediately after Sandy, several of us went down to the Jersey Shore to see what the impacts were. And if you see the house on the left and you see that squiggly blue line on the baseboard, that's where the water came up to. The immediate response is what you see on the right and below. And we started asking the question, does that make any sense? Is just raising the area, the homes, does that make sense? So we set some goals, complement the work that's underway, and recover and rebuild sustainably, both homes, businesses, and facilities. And I appreciated very much Nick's conversation this morning about what is resilience and how to approach that. We looked at the long term in particular. How do you mobilize a comprehensive approach to construction and reconstruction? How do we understand the potential for future natural disasters? Can we learn the lessons from this and previous disasters? And how do we implement resilient design solutions? Among the resources that we did was we actually worked with folks around the world, including folks from the Netherlands, who saw the Great Flood and experienced the Great Flood of 1953. And what they did was actually understand better how they were living and how they wanted to live in the future. And they came up with several options for addressing this, many of which were natural resource based. How do you use sand in particular to address dynamic preservation? Are there channel slope nourishments that we can look to? Are there tidal flats and other ways to use nature, and perhaps even mega nourishments? And yes, the folks in the Netherlands did also provide hard infrastructure issues and challenges to address. So we asked the students in particular, how do we deal with this? And the faculty, can we come up with some ideas? And we ran several studios, and I'll quickly go through some of those studios for you. The first studio was all about emergent materials and reactive environments. And not only did Susan and I work with people like Georgine Theodore, but we also worked with Martina Decker, who was in particular thinking a bit about new technologies. How do we deal with this? There are 4 different slides here, and I'll only address one of them, but basically get to the point of the students are thinking blue sky. How do we go well beyond where we are and where we'd like to be? And it's that blue sky thinking that you never, almost never, see in municipalities or counties or in state level governments, because we all are so busy trying to deal with today's problem. We're not thinking about 50 to 100 years from now and how can we deal with that? So one of the students looked in particular at Seabright, where the seawall was devastated and water came directly from the ocean and flooded the town, decimated all the public buildings and many of the private homes. And when we think about places like Seabright, we shouldn't necessarily think that these are luxury homes and luxury communities. There was a solid Hispanic community in Seabright, and working class folks were trying to figure out how do we help them out. So one of our students said, if we're going to rebuild a seawall, let's think a bit about how do we make it something people are proud and want to see. And so you see this beautiful picture here that says this is a place you want to walk on. And underneath, you'd actually have facilities, emergency care, maybe police, maybe a bike rack, thinking about this. But the brilliance came next, using emergent materials. And so Adam Morgan started thinking, what can we do on this seawall? And he came up with this idea of cladding the entire seawall, painting it with a 3-dimensional photoluminescent polymer. You basically paint it on, and during the day, the sunlight will be absorbed into the wall, and at night it will reflect, providing light. When we presented this to the mayor and the borough council in Seabright, they said, this is amazing. This could cut our electricity costs in half just by doing something like this. So getting that blue sky thinking, getting the students to think about how do we apply this is critically important. In a second studio on resilient coastal flooding that Keith Crumway organized, we looked in particular in the Union Beach area and how do you address some of these challenges? And Keith is now the dean of the College of Arts in California, dealing with the issues and the challenges in Los Angeles and the fires. So I sort of feel like in some ways, Sandy was his trial by fire. And now he's bringing a lot of those lessons on resilience to California. But the students also brought some amazing lessons. And what they looked at in particular was because of zoning and planning, all of the homes are basically the same, right? Same setback, same height, etc. And they got flooded. But Sandy was very random. For every house that was destroyed, 2 or 3 weren't. And the question of why is almost unthinkable. Some of it was planned, some of it wasn't. But how do you rebuild? And if you start raising some of these houses and don't raise others, what do you do to the community? So the students came up with the idea of what if you actually preserved a good portion of the land, pulled back the development, provided higher density, but actually used that natural resource to absorb the water? We can still live in these areas if we think thoroughly about this. And they call that the necklace. The second was basically looking at Amity House. How do you create a boardwalk and anticipate that water will flow underneath? Now, again, if there are major storms, we have to anticipate that too. But thinking about what people in Japan and other places around the world have dealt with that have had flooding is critically important. And then last but not least, I'm really proud of Lucy Huerta's work. Lucy, another one of my former students, who thought about the idea of amphibious housing and making that the new normal. Looks pretty normal, right? Sort of going through. But when it floods, perhaps we could build these on hydraulic lifts and that the actual motion of the waves could power the homes as it's going up and down to provide energy to the homes themselves and make them resilient. And the most interesting thing I thought was not only the idea, but how Lucy presented it. Not only using the engineering and all the details on this, but you see the boxes on the bottom. We're used to those, right? When we look at packaging, we're thinking about food and calories and everything else. She used that same thought to say, we're so used to looking and thinking that way. Let's apply it to resilient design. Another studio looked in particular at life with water, and this is again where the Dutch came in, but we looked at Galveston, Texas, which has flooded historically. We looked at Hoboken, which has and will continue to flood, and how do we address with that? And we looked at Venice, and we continue to see the impacts in places like this. So the students in particular thought about Le Corbusier's, the architect's plan for a hospital project in 1964 in Venice that literally would float on the water. Because if you're going to have people, we need to figure out how to take care of emergency services. So the students looked in particular at Union Beach and said, this is perhaps a way we could do something like that. Again, pulling back, allowing nature to absorb some of the water and some of the flooding, but also still have the necessary development that we need. It wasn't enough just to bring the students to the communities to learn and to apply their craft. It was also important that they volunteer their time. So we created 3 alternative spring breaks in the 3 years after Sandy. And it's one of the things I'm probably most proud of that I've done in my life, because we brought over 1,000 students up and down the coast and different places in New Jersey that were affected. And they did everything from cleaning up to planting dune grass to understanding how to make boardwalks more accessible. And I'll just show you 3 of these slides that we did. The second year, we chose to use the picture of the roller coaster that literally washed into the ocean, became iconic, but was also the first year a little bit raw. The second year, it reminded us how important it is to recover. And then the third was we can create real opportunities to move forward. We brought our message also to places around the world, in particular Calgary, which addressed flooding in 2013. They wanted to know how we were starting to recover and going through. And what amazed me most about Calgary is you can go to that city, the oil capital of Canada, and on any given street that goes directly to the water, a river, water body, etc., you can go cast your fishing line, catch that fish, and eat it. Calgary, the oil capital of Canada. Can we do that here in New Jersey? Why not? So we heard this morning about Rebuild by Design and what's happening in Hoboken and other places. I was fortunate to actually be the Jersey guy. I brought all these experts from around the world to New Jersey to see what we are and how we wanted to build. And we focused on regional scale solutions, increasing resilience, developing and promoting innovation, and connecting to local efforts. And I thought it was one of the most interesting aspects of bringing folks who have done resilience around the world to our special place. And it reminded us we are Jersey strong. We have a lot to offer. So my day job, I'm the executive director of the Musconetcong Watershed Association. And there we do planning, education, advocacy, and stewardship. We've put together a vision plan and 319 management plans. I have pamphlets on a resilient Musconetcong 2050, our new watershed vision plan, the first watershed vision plan in New Jersey. On the back is a QR code. You can scan it and actually go directly to our vision plan. Or if you go to page 13 of the program, you'll actually be able to scan that, go right there. We also put together Camp Muskie, and so we educate our kids and bring people engaged. We are strong supporters in our advocacy of NJPAC Real. We do need those rules and regulations in place. And we've been removing dams and addressing wastewater issues, because what we found in our water quality testing over the last 30 years is initial impairments were being caused by nature and by agricultural practices. But best management practices in agriculture have actually given us the opportunity to improve water quality. Now the problem is POGO. We've seen the problem and it is us. Failing septics are a major contributor to our water quality degradation. And when storms come and flooding happens, it becomes even worse. My other job is being a lecturer at the Blaustein School. And I have wonderful students, former students, including Joe Brosnan, who was over here. And many of them are practitioners. So Joe was working while he was studying, and you learn from that experience. Resilience has joined land use, transportation, housing, and other topic areas. So we specifically teach about resilience. We are addressing open space, farmland, and other natural features as critical infrastructure. I remember 15 years ago when I started teaching at NJIT in the architecture program, I talked about open space as infrastructure. You can imagine the looks I got, especially among architects and engineers and environmental scientists. Not anymore. Everybody gets it. But what is the importance? Well, watershed planning is the next great wave. And we use case studies to encourage students to apply theories to practice. And one of the things that we do, in particular in comprehensive planning, is talk about planning for resilience. And this year, I updated our syllabus to encourage students to read a Planning Advisory Service Report 402, Planning for Biophilic Cities. If you're an APA member, I encourage you to access this. If you're not, I encourage you to join APA. It's an amazing report. And a biophilic city is defined as a green city, a city with abundant nature and natural systems that are visible and accessible to urbanites. Goes into discussion about urban conditions and urban design, but it's also a spirit of a place. And this whole idea, again, of understanding the mind, the body, and we heard this morning in the plenary, the importance of open space, in particular, for our mental health. So within that, there's actually a discussion about how to create a biophilic comprehensive plan element. The municipal land use law in New Jersey allows you to actually have various elements. And this report gives you 4 different goals and objectives and strategies on how to actually create a new element or update your master plan to actually deal with biophilia and maybe even to issues of resilience. So the anticipated outcomes as we go through this is to anticipate current future conditions, test regulations, design prototypes, and imagine new ideas. And last but not least, what are the lessons? We need to look at what went right, what went wrong, and what almost went wrong, and how do we address this? So our key takeaways, infrastructure includes the natural systems and the environment. The planning practice should not just be about the built environment, and aspiration and blue sky thinking, which is often thwarted in practice, is an invaluable educational opportunity. And I'll leave you with this slide to say, how do we live with water? Think about our choices. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom. I'd like to invite Manushi Patel up to the podium. And it looks like your first slide is ready to go. Thank you so much.
Thank you, conference organizers, for this invitation. Up a little closer.
Oh, yeah, can you still see the laptop?
Yeah, I think so.
Speak
Is
up.
that better? Okay. We're really excited to be a part of this and to share our work. I'll be speaking about building a watershed alliance. So I'm Banushi Patel. My co-author, Professor Georgine Theodore, was not able to attend today, so I'll be presenting on behalf of both of us. We'll share our research and design on watershed planning by first providing some context on the research and design strategies as they've been developed in the context of higher education at NJIT, and then second by presenting a watershed planning and design project that we developed at our institution. A project focused on building a Passaic River Watershed Alliance, and it was developed by a group of students, including myself and Professor Theodore, in the fall of 2022 at NJIT's Hiller College of Architecture and Design. A little bit about us and the context in which we are working. I attended NJIT for my Master of Science in Architecture degree, and I'm currently working as a designer on large-scale infrastructure projects at STV. Georgine is an architect, an urban designer, principal at Interboro Partners, and professor at NJIT, where she directs the Master of Urban Design program. This program is a 30-credit STEM-designated design intensive program within NJIT's College of Architecture and Design. Typically, the foundation of programs in urban design and architecture education is a studio, which is sort of a lab in which a team of students and their professor work together to tackle a challenge connected to built environment. It's typically highly creative and very collaborative. Georgine organizes these studios in 3 phases, which are mapping, frameworks, and demonstration projects. This format gives students exposure to urban design tools and methodologies, and also offers the opportunity to tackle specific research and design challenges unique to each student and their disciplinary interests. The focus of mapping is creative, empirical, and data analysis with synthesis into compelling, novel visualizations, like here where we looked at the demographics and visualized that combined sewer outfalls are concentrated in communities of color and low-income neighborhoods. The core of frameworks is the development of spatial and morphological strategies at the scale of an urban site. And the emphasis of demonstration projects is the careful design of catalytic, near-term, implementable projects that jumpstart the framework. While the overall structure of the three-phase format has been consistent in her studios, the specific design topics have been very diverse, with each topic addressing a pressing urban issue that ranges from watershed conservation to aging in place, rethinking industrial city, just to name a few. And some of the other key elements that differentiate her studio include a typical two-semester sequence, where in the first semester they focus on a local site in the New Jersey region, in which students build their urban research and design skills. And the second semester focuses on an international project with a more open-ended research and design agenda. Over the course of the semester, outside experts from different backgrounds visit the class, and invited experts give presentations and feedback on studio's work. A key component to this pedagogy is encouraging and training students to collaborate with the project partners and also with each other. So the semester usually starts out with each student working individually on a different task, and then after that task is complete, the students team up in groups of 2 or 3 to tackle the next phase of work. With each successive round, students join larger and larger groups until you have one group and one shared project. This process requires dialogue, listening and learning from others, advocacy, creative synthesis among all the participants. Over the years, the program has partnered with many agencies, departments, and organizations, and having these partnerships result in a sense of purpose and excitement, but also provides new knowledge that is valuable beyond the classroom itself. And over a 4-year process, Georgine conceptualized a series of interrelated interscalar studios that iteratively built on one another, centering on Newark, New Jersey, and scaling outward. These scales included the district, the neighborhood, the city, and the region. And the goal was not to follow some kind of formula, but really it was about how we could make the time to create value research and design ideas that went beyond the classroom. This open-ended and creative environment is central to a research-based university and core of service-based learning. During these studios, one of the common urban themes was to look at the larger watershed to understand its complexities and how communities living within it have been negatively impacted. So today I'll be speaking about the Passaic watershed. So we first started by visualizing this region using GIS, where we illustrated the Passaic River, its tributaries, and here we've shown open space in green and purple that represented industrial land. We also illustrated municipalities and note that there are parts of New York that are also included in this region. Um, And then in the beginning of the semester, we also looked at Powell's map, the arid region of the United States, which he presented to the US Senate in 1890, that offered a radical new vision of the American West, which were centered not on traditional political boundaries, but rather on watershed boundaries. And within this watershed, there are about 4 million residents spanning across 2 states, 10 counties, 180 municipalities. And I will come back to this misalignment between the subwatershed and municipal boundaries in a few minutes. For our studio, the focus on the watershed was on 3 key geographical parts: the upper, the middle, and the lower basins, in which we worked on Newark, Patterson, and Ringwood sites that represented some of the older industrial towns where the fight for environmental justice has been crucial. So how did we get started? For phase 1, we started by investigating the watershed as a whole. But in order to understand the complexities at more human scale, we wanted to first know what it was like being on the water and actually with it in ways that would make the studio a little bit more experiential. So we took 2 trips, one where we kayaked south along the Passaic River around Patterson, and then a riverboat tour along the same river but near Newark. Through these tours, site visits to the 3 communities, and having conversations with residents, we learned that people actually had a lot better connection with water in the upper parts of the basin than the lower. And we started to look at these more closely and cataloging some of the barriers that would then inform our frameworks in the next phase. Along with the research for water access, each student also individually worked on creating watershed-wide visualizations that included urban themes like demographics, land use, and many others. Here I've highlighted the research from the theme that I worked on, which was storm and wastewater management, which when visualized revealed how those that were adversely impacted were often minorities. Taking all the research from the previous phase, we then worked in groups for phase 2 to create a framework for future planning. I'd like to share the Newark and Patterson proposals. So first up is Newark. Here, along with the common threats that were faced by the watershed and the city, we also researched zoning, current uses, commercial corridors, access to open space, abandoned areas, all of which gave us an insight into the current issues that could be the focus of our framework at both the scale of the city and the neighborhood. And some of the things that stood out when focusing on the riverfront area and understanding the land usage was that one, it was mainly occupied by industrial businesses, and two, there were some vacant sites owned by the city along the edge that were promising to provide direct access to water. And then combining all the research, our framework proposed blue-green streets with bioswales that connected people of the northward towards the Passaic River and poked through the current highway barrier to bring them in towards the river. It included turning an abandoned train line into pedestrian and biking trail. And the program was designed to have green industrial zones with green areas to not only provide open spaces, but also more permeable surfaces along the river. It also created local jobs, and within one of the vacant sites, we proposed a dock for direct access to the water. The entire framework became a loop that connected the residents to the riverfront, commercial streets, and Branchbrook Park to activate the neighborhood. Next, we'll look at Patterson. Similar to Newark, students focused on critical issues related to water in Patterson, one of them being the limited connection to the river surrounding the city with many barriers, both natural and man-made, that block the access to water. Also, access to open space is not only a question of recreation, but also connected to health. So it became really important to provide even more opportunities for people to interact with the Passaic River in order to improve the way that water can have an effect on their health. The Patterson framework included three main elements: a continuous greenway with access points that connected the neighborhood nodes with riverfront, and green streets that was similar to Newark to connect both the sites. So the overall plan proposed a riverfront trail that connected most of the city parallel to the water with multiple points of access to get into the river. Green industrial zones, along with open spaces such as parks, were key elements to provide local jobs while also connecting to the commercial corridors within the city. Now, engagement has been a key component of the urban design studios led by Georgine, and with no exception for this project, we considered the interests of our project partners to develop an engagement station that could facilitate interactions with different stakeholders. The station was designed to create a space of engagement while sharing information, gaining more input, and create excitement about the larger project to make a watershed-wide alliance among local communities. The idea first came out of a beach mobile, which could temporarily activate the river's edge and create a space of engagement. And we proposed retrofitting a food truck to bring more people into the discussion. But then the station took form of a table that would make visible some of the complexities of the watershed, like the one I had mentioned earlier, between the sub-watershed boundaries that became the 3D printed pieces and the municipal boundaries, which would be a map laid under those pieces, all of which was supported by a wooden base. Here you can see how we got started by creating an informative map with water bodies, political boundaries, water reservoirs, and other key information from our phase 1 research. And then we started working on the top 3D pieces that had topography and water bodies engraved into it. These pieces became sort of a puzzle, like when we cut them with sub-watershed boundaries. And here are some of the images from our reviews throughout the semester. including the final one where we were able to present it to the reviewers. As I mentioned, the goal with the station was to start conversations, which we did by launching the table at 2 events, one in Newark Library and one in Patterson. But we also wanted to have some prompts for engagement. So along with the table, we created these engagement cards that were designed to help facilitate discussions. And these included a visual on the front with supporting text on the back, like the watershed research, questions for getting some input, showing water connections, and asking people how they currently or in the future would like to connect with the rivers, and some historical context. And these are some of the images from the Newark Library event, where we were able to receive some positive responses and engage in meaningful conversations. And we were also able to present our project at both the places. So I will finish off by reiterating that working at a large scale of the watershed was challenging, but through some of the guiding principles from the Urban Design Studio, we were able to research, plan, and provide new knowledge and design strategies that are necessary for urban planning in the future. Thank you.
Great. And now I'd like to invite Lori Ferreras to come up and present her landscape architecture thesis work while it's emerging. So thank you. Yeah.
So my name is Lori Ferreras. My thesis committee are Richard Alomar as the chair and David Tulloch and Kimberly Russell.
Just a little
bit more.
closer if you can.
Yeah, right there.
Oh. Are you all right?
Yes. Can you hear me better? Yes. Richard Alomar as the chair and David Tulloch and Kimberly Russell as my committee members. The title of my thesis is Urban Climate Resiliency Transformative Strategies for Guanajuato and San Jose, Maya West, Puerto Rico. A little bit about myself. I didn't know what landscape architecture was until I took a career quiz. I graduated from Rutgers in ecology in 2021, became an AmeriCorps member for 6 months in New Hampshire, and when I got back home, I worked in a lab for the remaining 6 months. I wanted to go back for my master's, but I didn't know what exactly, so I took that career quiz. And my boyfriend had pointed out, the person who took this picture of me winning an award last year as an Olmsted Scholar, that landscape architecture was my calling. And you know what? Planning and designing spaces for wildlife and people in response to the effects of climate change did not sound like a bad idea. So when researching the background information about Puerto Rico, I saw that there was a lack of disaster preparedness, settlement safety, and a unified plan to handle the effects of climate change. For that reason, despite knowing the lack of organization and political challenges, I wanted to help by providing a blueprint, guidelines for an urban climate resiliency. So my questions were, how prepared is Puerto Rico for the impacts of climate change? What are the challenges preventing a unified plan? And what framework that exists could work in Puerto Rico given the context? So imagine you are a second-year grad student and Richard Alomar is also the department of the chair. He asked if you want to be hired to go to Puerto Rico to choose a site for a studio and for your thesis. I said, of course, yes, I would do that. I did not think twice about it. Aside from being hired for the job, like Moana, Water Systems called me. From a young age, I learned to swim. From swimming, I learned how to snorkel and scuba dive. I even received a boating license in New Hampshire as an AmeriCorps member. In terms of Maya West, I became fascinated with its unique history, geography, challenges in comparison to other major cities like San Juan. I learned a lot about Maya West through the professors and students at the University of Puerto Rico in Maya West, which is shown in the picture. The two sites I will focus on are San Juan and Maya West. They are mostly similar, but the San Juan Bay watershed has a management plan to handle the effects of climate change, while Maya West does not. San Juan also has more urban runoff, while Maya West has agricultural runoff. So what is an estuary? And I will be talking about estuaries pretty often since I'm focusing on it. An estuary is a freshwater system, such as a river or stream that meets saltwater. It's an essential hotspot for wildlife and can serve for protection for people. We have many estuaries here in New Jersey, actually. Mangroves. I love mangroves. I wrote a paper about mangroves, and now I just can't stop talking about it. Their thick root system help with coastal erosion and serves as a protection against storm surges. I have touched their root systems before, and it really does feel like it's anchored down. And the same goes for coral reefs. As someone who loves the ocean and swim among the fishes, not only does it provide habitat for marine life, but it also helps with wave energy reduction. And you can see that through this image. The combination of coral reefs and the mangroves working together to help save or protect the city. Estuaries, mangroves, coral reefs, and people are in danger in Puerto Rico. The only tropical estuary protected outside the United States is San Juan Bay Estuary. I listed only the top estuaries on this slide, but Puerto Rico has many more estuaries throughout the island and coastal cities that are not prepared for the effects of climate change. When researching for a functional urban climate resilient framework, Steven Tyler and Marcus Monk work stood out to me. Steven Tyler received a PhD in city and regional planning, while Marcus Monk received a PhD in energy and resources. Both wrote a framework for urban climate resilience. And this theoretical approach has been utilized in 10 cities in Vietnam, India, Thailand, and Indonesia. And while I knew the context was very different from Puerto Rico, I wanted to test it. So I read their research and found these 3 simple yet powerful words to be simple enough for locals to understand and utilize as a blueprint for success. Of course, I was thinking, well, it can be simple for me to understand, but will it work in an area that is very difficult to achieve a common goal? There's a lack of communication between academia and locals, distrust between locals and leaders, and this first visit to Puerto Rico served to be an important time for me. So this first visit, I went to San Juan Bay Estuary Watershed, and where I met with volunteers from Estuario. Estuario is a nonprofit organization that was founded in 1994. It oversees 9 municipalities, and the objective is to protect the people and the watershed. Because they are successful, I applied the Tyler and Monk's Urban Climate Resiliency Framework to the organization to see this theoretical approach can be applied beyond an Asian city to an urban tropical estuarine setting. By speaking with volunteers and doing research, I found how the system, agents, and institutions were applied. Estuario focused on infrastructure within the urban areas, which are in red, and the ecosystems that are in blue and green. They monitor and assess the conditions of the ecosystems and listen to the needs of local communities when there is difficulty with infrastructure such as stormwater to advocate for their needs. But they do not only listen, they act. They have formed connections, the agents, with individuals in federal agencies, academics, businesses, and nonprofits. These relationships are essential in receiving aid and advice, but also to respond to the needs of the communities. With their action, they are able to recommend policies and programs that will help better the communities and ecosystems. By implementing a conservation and management plan that has been working, they are able to oversee many projects for research and development, community engagement, education, and experiences that communities will not forget. I will also not forget that this actual community engagement when I was in the field, when I saw an artist win a competition in painting, and she was able to paint a wall mural that represented the watershed. And there were so many people that stopped by to work and to talk and ask questions about what she was doing and what is this serving. And so this shows that the community is very vibrant and care for their spaces and livelihoods. So applying Tyler's and Monk's works in the context of Estuario is simple but achievable in a setting that proves to be difficult to manage and organize. So this is where Maya West is located on the western side of the island. The left map shows 3 watersheds within Maya West: Rio Grande de Añaco watershed, Rio Ya West watershed, Rio Guanahibo watershed. You can see how the many rivers drain into Maya West Bay and how mountainous it is. It's important to note that the informal and formal architectural agricultural practices typically occur in the mountains. It is like the countryside of the island. On the right are barrios, which can be equivalent to cities or towns. My site is located on the lower left side of the map. And the following images are the 3 watersheds and what Maya West looks like on the ground level. So Rio Añaco, Rio Ya West, Rio Guanahibo, and the different terrains of Maya West, which can range from forested, the plaza space, tightly knitted urban space, forested, or urbanized mountains. Though the reason why I chose my specific sites were because my second visit to Puerto Rico. I shared an image earlier of me with professors and students from the University of Puerto Rico in Maya West, and they gave me a tour of the municipality. Out of all the places, this site stuck to me because of the vulnerabilities. They have only one roadway. Where San Jose is located is mostly composed of an elderly population. There are poor evacuation routes, eroding shorelines, 3 bridges that have collapsed before and left the people stranded. So images of storm surges and 2 bridges that have collapsed in the past, you will see. There will be nowhere to go and no one's really doing anything about it. They have plans to channelize Rio Guanahibo to build a seawall and help the evacuation routes, but it's not enough. So this is how the sites look like. And I was also glad that the people I met showed me this area. They showed me abandoned homes where you can see on the lower right, elevated homes, again, the close-knit homes, and also understanding that the place was very vulnerable to storm surges and floods. They told me people have experienced 5 to 8 feet of floods in the areas that cannot, so this shows that they cannot show or withstand prolonged rainfall. Again, how close the bridge is to the river shoreline. And on January 11th of this year, they had a strong storm surge, which you can see on the lower left, where the mangroves were destroyed. So the left map shows the entire area being a flood zone, the same as what was explained to me. The curious part is that the flood zone extends beyond the site into inland urban areas. Sea level rise projections that is displayed on the right map are scientific predictions about how much average global ocean level is expected to increase over a specific time frame. So we see the sea level rise surrounding the sites, but affecting the mangroves. Mangroves cannot be totally immersed in salt water, so they will move inland. They also serve as a barrier for the inland urbanization, so they will lose yet another layer of protection. So we combine sea level rise with storm surges that we see here. We can see that these sites are in danger. Not right now, but in my life, I will see permanent damage and the effects of climate change will have on this coastal region. And again, a plan does not exist for this area, but Tyler and Monk's framework can jumpstart action towards saving areas like this along with other places along the island and even in the mainland United States. So applying the framework again. the systems, the ecosystems. Again, pointing out the mangroves behind the urbanization, in front, the coral reef that is just north, the rivers, the infrastructure. The 3 bridges are located on 1, 3, and 4. I'll show images in the next slide. So again, one bridge, another, and here. And that, like I said, they have collapsed in the past. So key agents with MyOS will be different from San Juan in terms of academics and nonprofits. But I'd like to emphasize the need to collaborate and unify the island as a whole for a common cause, which in this case is to create an urban climate resiliency framework that suits the needs and context of coastal communities. The same applies to institutions, except it would have a management plan that suits the needs of the urbanized areas and extend further outreach. So preparing a hypothetical 2060 situation. This is still in progress, and I'm working on this with my committee. And so the thought is to establish a nonprofit in terms of creating a connection between the locals and the federal agencies so that there is an achievable goal, such as advocating to establish Maya West Bay as a protected estuary. Sorry. Okay. This slide shows the phases of where community engagement is key to empower communities to advocate for their safety and protection of their homeland. So in creating community programs, creating resilient infrastructure, and advocating for instance, coastal zoning laws to limit development in vulnerable areas. And lastly, by this time frame, I would imagine by 2040, 2060, there will be a certain point where these urbanized areas will no longer be livable. So where they would go and how to protect the inland urbanized areas will be the next focus. So to plan and design the retreat strategies, advance climate resilient urban planning, and to prepare for sea level rise impacting inland barrios. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think you all have set the stage beautifully for what I wanted to share today, so I'm going to jump right into it. I am the municipal policy specialist at the Watershed Institute, which actually does all 3 things that you're proposing in your framework, which is advocacy, training citizens. We're a nonprofit. We partner with communities, and I work with local governments typically. But a decade ago, for over a decade, as a licensed architect and planner, I taught at NJIT School of Architecture. And I created the Garden State Studios as a way to focus the attention of the students on actual sites, specific sites in New Jersey, and allow them to connect with the communities, which wasn't happening a lot in architecture schools at the time. So I thought I'd just touch on 3 studios today, just a couple of images from an industrial site in Manville, which is within our watershed area. It had just come off the federal Superfund site. It had been delisted and treated, and that was called Superfund Site Mixed Use Redevelopment. And then the other studio was immediately following Superstorm Sandy, and it was called it was a coastal project, and I called it Unbuilding, a Barrier Island Borough Hall. And unbuilding is the opposite of what architects usually want to do. So we're trying to flip the narrative here and get the thinking, critical thinking, to kick in the design community. And the third one is inland in Pequannock, the Passaic River Basin. It's called Upstream, Capsizing the Strip Mall. And it's upstream from the state's first Blue Acre buyouts, which is one of the worst flooding locations in the state. But the reason for these photos is that this Manville studio pictured here was a partnership with Somerset County Planning, the developer who actually controlled the land, the students, and the elected officials. So it was a unique collaboration. And I know you all know what a watershed is by now, but really the reason to teach resilient design is because of our watersheds, to improve the quality, to reduce flooding. There are three things that challenge our watersheds. That's humans, architects, developers, development changing the water cycle. Also, the development pressures and trends over time, which have almost, that red band in this animation is almost like strangling the state. If you look at the density of development that now crosses in that sensitive area between the highlands and the coastal plain. We also have climate trends, which you've all heard about, and this is causing all kinds of communities throughout the whole state to recognize the challenges that we have. So why teach this in New Jersey? Well, I personally believe that redevelopment is really our best hope for reversing, unbuilding bad, irrelevant past development, for restoration of environmental systems, which will lead to resiliency. And we all know we're not just a little skinny strip on the New Yorker cover, which is like a Hudson River waterfront and nothing else. We know New Jersey is a very interesting place environmentally and culturally. So the Garden State Studios is a portfolio. I just wanted to show you 6 of the geographies that we addressed, but the 3 on the right are the ones I mentioned featuring. And unbuilding, in my definition, is a restoration practice and a resilient design strategy for previously developed sites. And the criteria that was given to the students was to reduce the building footprint while adding uses and adding square footage, to remove impervious cover, to restore environmental features, to use low impact design, and to use enhanced stormwater management. Of course, in academia, we have the benefit of using precedents, research, and mapping, as you've heard. And this is my library. And the book that I featured in many of my studios was Design with Nature by Ian McHarg, published in 1969. And it remains relevant because when you are looking at an overdeveloped area like a barrier island post-Sandy, you need a reminder of what a barrier island is and what sort of environment it is and how it wants to perform. So one of the things that I always try to teach is dexterity for the students to jump scale. And I think we've already seen some of that, especially in Georgine's studio, where we want design thinking and the thinking about watersheds to occur at different scales. And I'm going to take you quickly through the Millstone River watershed pictured here, with Manville at the mouth of the Millstone at the very top where it meets the Raritan. And the red circle is the lower Millstone, sub-watershed. Manville, again, on the big map, is circled in red. Manville, as you know, has a lot of challenges with flooding. Now, way upstream from Manville is the borough of Hopewell, that little red circle on the bottom left. And then if you go up to the right, that is a map of Hopewell Borough. And the red circle there indicates a stream that disappears from the GIS mapping. Now we're going to jump scale again to get into the architectural scale, just for you to experience this idea of thinking. And here's a detail, and there's the stream that disappears. It goes underground, it's buried, it's in a culvert, and lo and behold, should we be surprised, this is where the worst flooding occurs in Hopewell Borough, and quite recently due to climate change. But look at the opportunity I circled in red. Those are currently described as redevelopment sites. So the borough has a chance to improve not only its local problems, but provide some regional benefits. So that is a watershed view. And to go back up to Manville, which was one of the studios I taught, we can look at the site circled in black, but you can see its adjacency to the confluence of two rivers. And you can also see the floodplain in yellow with the red area as the flood hazard zone increased with the inland flood protection rule that we heard about this morning. On the top right is a watercolor map that I made of our site as a way to process the information I was gathering about Manville before teaching the students. Now, there were 3 groups and 3 strategies for this site. Each student designed in architectural scale a piece of the projects, but this is just one concept this is the ribboning team. And the ribboning team, as you can see with the red circle, made sure that their concept on the 10-acre parcel, a redevelopment parcel, had a connection to the river and to the Lost Valley. And they wanted to make this connection through a green space that they would weave through their project. And this is an example of a presentation board where the final project site plan is on the right, and the different scales of consideration, diagrams, and strategies are documented on the left. And you can see it's a stormwater management strategy, it's a green infrastructure strategy, and it's also sensitive to the existing community in terms of scale, and saying and proposing that access to the river should be an asset and not something that we turn our back on. So when Sandy hit, we went immediately to the barrier island at the epicenter of the storm. The town of Bay Head lost their borough hall. It's a public property, it was a public building, and this is what we found. The students studied the history and did some mapping. And one thing that you'll find interesting is the gray area on the bottom of this visual history is like a cross section, which is not unlike the next drawing where you see the cross section through the dune. It's almost the same shape. This is the land, and the shape of the land from the ocean on the left all the way to the bay on the right. And the top right is a FEMA map. It's a 2-dimensional map, but it declared the various heights that buildings would have to be lifted to. And the reason why I made this diagram is not only because we have newfound resilient space down in the flood zone, as you can see with the 2 red boxes on the building being lifted at the bay, but most of us are used to building heights and the streetscape being regulated by the height off of grade, off of land. But now we have a new datum, and that's sea level. So all buildings have to relate in one way or another to that new datum. And the students looked at infrastructure. The top right, this horrendous condition where a whole parking lot drains directly through this pipe into the tidal water. They rebuilt the borough hall, but they left that ridiculous drainage scenario and did no improvements with green infrastructure or stormwater management after rebuilding the building. But the students even had a very interesting idea on the left. Why not take all the paved streets that dead end at the water or at the beach and green them and buffer them against these sensitive dynamic landscapes? And Pablo Lopez did a beautiful project here where he showed how the project program broke down to fit the scale of the residential community, and how he regreened and proposed man-made restorative wetlands. And then on the his final image, this is referred to as a living shoreline, where you buffer against tidal impacts. He also created a responsive facade. So in various conditions of extreme heat, storms, the facades could respond to that. And Mike Hurdle did a beautiful scheme here, which actually offered, as you can see on the right, not only restoration, but recreation access, which the community still doesn't have on this public land. So then to go inland, this is 10 acres of paving. It's a strip mall. I called this studio Capsizing the Strip Mall. We really needed to flip the narrative and flip this practice, this ubiquitous practice of paving over floodplains. This is my hometown of Wayne in pink. That's all impervious cover. And I witnessed in my childhood the paving of floodplains in the 60s and the 70s and onward. This is just upstream of the first Blue Acre buyouts, the bottom red circle where the Pompton River meets the Passaic. That's what we were dealing with, a mall that flooded 3 times in a 5-year period. This is student research. They actually looked at the watershed. They looked at the watershed in relation to political boundaries, and they mapped it. They were asked to create a site strategy, a resilient site strategy that would break apart the building, add housing, but restore the floodplain, which you can see on the right. 1/3 of the property was given back to the floodplain, and lots of green infrastructure woven throughout. Now, this is zooming in even further to the architectural scale, but the upper level included pedestrian circulation, the lower level, more automobile circulation. But what you see at the bottom is you see a building that's relatively porous that can collect at the bottom level, it can collect stormwater. And you see a lot of the greenery that can perform as stormwater management green infrastructure. And you can see here the cross sections, which take you from the river and the restored floodplain up to some of the buildings, which not only reproduce the commercial space that the owner currently has, but adds housing and civic uses as well. You can see here that even on the bottom, the building itself is porous and it lets light and water move through the building as well as the site. And I like, this is my last slide. And I want to make the point that a lot of what we heard this morning, and especially about the current real rules, the resilient environments and landscapes, I find it fascinating that 10 years ago, before this rule was even introduced, our students chose to render their projects from the viewpoint of green infrastructure, and that they not only produced beautiful designs for building, which unbuilds the site, but also gave us this emphasis. So our next generation professionals here that are in school, we are going to depend on them to take us forward. And they are doing work that's ahead of our regulatory, scenario now, and they can be leaders in this. So I want to thank the panel for sharing these 4 different views of what we're studying, learning, and proposing in the academic institutions, which I hope can partner with your towns, your environmental commissions, and your planning entities to help you visualize resilient design and how you can incorporate these things into your redevelopment sites and plans. Thank you so much. Now, I know that our session is running out of time. I guess we're heading into lunch next. I know that there was one question online. I don't know if there are some new ones, but something about financing. And I just have to say that no, the students aren't learning about the financial, landscape, if you will. I mean, it's constantly changing, as we've seen with the, financing of warehouses, which wasn't even a thing a couple of years ago. But no, but what the students are really good at is brainstorming, problem solving, visualizing, and partnering. And I think we made the point today that it's an interdisciplinary effort. But if anyone has a question in the room and you're not anxious to escape this space, I would like to offer you an opportunity to ask us questions. And Sarah has a mic if that helps you. Thank you.
Well, we want to use this so that the Zoom people can hear the questions. Yeah.
Does anybody have any questions?
Well, could I ask, Lori, I was just in Puerto Rico and flew back yesterday afternoon. So I am, recently reminded of what an amazing place that is. You may have shared, but what is the population of the Maya Ways sort of urban, or that whole region, just to put it in context of how many people we're talking about that
From the census data of 2023, there are 69,000 people around that. 53% of the population is in poverty. There overall in the island, there is low education, attainment, low income for housing. But they do have a high median age range as well, but it's a difficult process. In one of the images that I showed in Maya West, there is very mountainous, like I said. And so those close-knit, the urbanization, the housing on a particular mountain. Actually, let me give a little bit more context. So for my original site, I had chosen La Chora. And this site did not have the water-related issues that I thought it was going to have. Instead, it had more social issues in terms of poverty and drug-related things. And I could not even go into that site because of accessibility and political conflict. So it's there. It's just, again, the political challenges of the island is, I guess, similar to our circumstances now. So it's just, they're not addressing it as they should.
question.
I just wanted to highlight a few things. I already addressed the financing on commercial buildings. I think hopefully I made the point in one of the presentations that, the planning policy in the state and the new state plan are encouraging mixed use. And so we're not looking at single uses like we used to in the 80s when there were big sprawling campuses of just commercial or just, housing. And now we're looking at being a little more sort of traditional with mixed use. But we have a comment, a recommendation, actually. Someone submitted a specific project that is a beautiful unbuild, and it's the redone MacArthur Elementary School in post Hurricanes Lee and Irene in Binghamton, I assume Binghamton, New York. And so anyone who wants to look at a project that sort of fulfills some of the criteria that we were discussing, we will look into that. Thank you for that. And then somebody said, thank you for zooming into the Hopewell Borough, which, shows the conditions there, very specific conditions that are relevant to the larger watershed. And this person loved the inclusion of mangroves as and super appreciates all the presentations. But that leads me to a question I had. You said we have estuaries in New Jersey and it's a different climate, but I wondered if you could do you want to say anything about our estuaries or what we should know about them?
In my last studio that I had with David Tulloch, we were working on connecting having a sort of connection to Boyd Park, which is on the Raritan River. And so through my connection of the places, I was suggesting connection to the wetlands. And so if you look at the Raritan River, it goes into the Raritan Bay. And that's an estuary in itself. And that alone, along with South River, has so many challenges in terms of how are we unifying the communities together to work for a common cause so that the water quality is improved. Right now, there are people who are fishing in those areas, and this is contaminated water and it's not healthy. New Brunswick itself has challenges with those in poverty. And so there are individuals who are homeless, who bathe in the river. And this is one unsanitary, and also they can catch things from the river because of like what's going into it and its history with factories and urban runoff and things of that sort. And so this is very important because this is also going into the Raritan Bay, and we want to have a healthy community. And same goes with, I believe, the Passaic River. It goes into the ocean as well, and we know what's the history of that and things of that sort.
Yeah, I just recently watched with a community group, watched the American River documentary about the Passaic River, and it's from the Water View. I highly recommend it. And I think it would be fun to actually narrate through it all the things that our watershed organizations are doing in our work with that visual, as a guide. Tom, did you have a comment?
Just very quickly on the unbuilding issue, going through, you don't have to go as far as Binghamton, New York, come up to Asbury, New Jersey. So actually, we ended up last year demolishing an old factory, an old laboratory building in the middle of a river. We put stairs in, solidified the platform, and now we created a new park in the middle of Musconetcong River. And it's an unbuilding project that actually has received 3 awards from New Jersey Future Smart Growth, also from ANJAC for environmental achievement. And we also received an award from APA New Jersey for the work we do there. And then if you come to our headquarters, our River Resource Center is the old bakery building that used to bake the graphite. And it is now our River Resource Center. It's the world's smallest LEED Platinum certified building, composting toilets, solar power, and geothermal. So come on up to Asbury. You can see unbuilding.
And that's a reminder that our historic resources in New Jersey are frequently on waterways for obvious reasons, originally for power, for industry. I actually went out of state to the University of Virginia, but my thesis was in Paterson, New Jersey. So Manushi's work on Paterson is something I'm going to look more closely at. But it's fascinating. I mean, Alexander Hamilton actually founded Paterson with the Society of Useful Manufactories in 1791. So New Jersey was industrialized really early relative to the rest of America. And, there's a lot of restoration that needs to occur and reversal. So her Passaic project, I just wondered if she could say one thing about Ringwood, because Ringwood goes back to revolutionary times as an industrial, like a mining center, right? Could you, since that wasn't in your presentation, and I know it's the Ramapo Lenape community up there, could you just tell us a little bit?
Yeah, we visited the site as well, and we spoke with the Turtle Clan and a lot of people and organizations in Ringwood. It has a long history of, all the things that we looked at, environmental justice with industrialization and the lands being polluted. So it sort of connected with the other 2 sites. But it seemed like that people actually still went out to the water and really wanted to connect to it. So, like we've talked about with other presentations, I think it's really important to look at all the parts of New Jersey, and a lot of them have history of, industrialization and kind of contaminated sites, and understanding the history behind it, but also just looking at future planning and doing the frameworks and all the research that we've been doing and planning is really important. Yeah.
One more Patterson tidbit is that it was actually planned by a European, Pierre L'Enfant, who laid out the city plan of Washington, D.C. And when he came to Patterson, he actually, his plan, he did a plan. I don't know that we actually have a lot of evidence, we have writing. His plan was too grandiose for infant America and these, you know, kind of early ideas. So it never manifested the way it did for the city of Washington. But planning and engineering has always, you know, been there. And the timing wasn't always right, but now the timing is right for us to work for restoration and resiliency with our watershed. So thank you very much for attending.